Hey everyone, Heartless here. With me is CavalierGuest, and welcome to the second episode of Educational Lounge. Man, first of all, I kind of before we begin, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who watched the first episode and then proceeded to participate in our new Educational Lounge text channels on Discord. It's actually been quite lively there. With a lot of mock drafting going on, especially that channel. Like the mock draft channel was a big success, and we've seen like several drafts going on there every single day since. So it's really cool to see people adapting and accepting this new educational part in Heroes Lounge that we've been building. So that's really awesome.
Headphones messed up my hair. Yeah, and like I had a mock draft channel in the Nexus Schoolhouse Discord for a while, and it's surprising how many people just use it constantly, especially because you don't really have opportunities to draft outside of that. So it's always a good resource to have, and it's nice to see people using it.
Yeah, it's been really cool. I didn't think it's gonna take on as much as it did, but it has, and it's been fantastic experience for everyone in Heroes Lounge. So, I mean, thank you, Cav. Admittedly, I took the idea from you. I'm not sure if you were the originator of it, but I did take that.
I was not.
You were not. Okay.
It existed on the Snipe City Discord for a while, and it's existed on other Discords that I'm aware of. I just put it on my channel, and then I said everyone should have one, and then people should listen to me. So.
Yeah.
So, I'll take credit for spreading the word. I'll take credit for that.
All right. So it's been really a fantastic experience for us, and I'm glad for that. Now, if we can begin with our educational show. For this episode, we're going to be talking about map breakdown. I've actually kind of announced it several times already throughout the week. On Discord, we actually even had a Reddit post tonight, so it's not a big surprise to anyone. But talking about maps in Heroes of the Storm, that's kind of a fair warning to you guys. It's a really, really big topic. There are a lot of things we can talk about. And we're only humans, and we're limited by time. And because of that, this specific episode is going to be kind of a general overview and breakdown of the map. We will not be as specific or as detailed as possible for the reasons I just stated. I'm sure that Cav would agree with me if I were to say we can definitely talk for an hour or two on every single map. So, if not even more, so...
I mean, I certainly could, and I have on my stream in different points. So it's just, and it's sort of the defining element of Heroes of the Storm as a MOBA. We have shared experience, which LoL and Dota don't have. But the biggest difference about Heroes of the Storm for every other MOBA is that they always play on the same map every single time. So it's easy to be very, very refined with your timings and your play on those maps because you're playing the same map. You don't have to think about all these variables. But in terms of Heroes of the Storm, every map is different. Every map has its own meta. There are certain universal things that sort of apply from map to map to map. But there are maps where like certain heroes historically have been straight up like not only viable, but broken. And then on every other map, they were garbage. So you have this aspect of hero balance that even comes into talking about the game where heroes can be really good on some maps and garbage on others. And you have to consider that every map has its own meta. So instead of keeping track of one meta in the competitive scene, you just keep track of 9.
Yeah. And actually, one of the recent heroes, I mean, maybe it's not so recent, maybe I'm just getting old, but Hanzo is a really good example of a hero that completely changed the balance on a lot of maps. More than Battlefield of Eternity. People oftentimes think, well, Hanzo is really good on Battlefield, it's really obvious why, but actually he changed the dynamic on many maps, specifically those with bosses. This is something we'll get into later on, but it is a really good point. Now, I think the best map we can start with, and this is just my personal choice, is going to be Infernal Shrines. In my opinion, Infernal Shrine is one of my personal favorites, and it is a map that I personally consider to be one of the most, if not most balanced map in the game. If we'll take like a hypothetical scenario where every MOBA would take a map to represent itself, I think Infernal Shrine would do a really good job representing Heroes of the Storm. It's a pretty big map in size. It's not oppressively big. The objective is good and well balanced, and overall there's a good diversity of camps there. Kev, what is your opinion? And I think also, as a small note, I think it's probably the most played map in Heroes Lounge specifically, and one of the most played maps in the pro scene in general. So, Kev, do you think about the map?
I think before we start talking about individual maps, we have to talk about what we're thinking of when we're discussing maps and map strategies.
Okay.
Because there's an overarching thing that everyone sort of needs to understand to help them understand maps, and it's XP economy and win conditions. So when you're talking about XP economy of a map, you're talking about all the sources of experience that exist on the map. How do you get that experience? How do you kill buildings because they give experience? And then what's your win condition? And win conditions vary quite a bit from map to map. Like talking about the map's win conditions and how you can exploit them, not in individual compositions win condition. Just like, for instance, on Dragon Shire, everyone talks about it. The win condition is usually bottom keep. You want to open up the bottom lane so you can push with the multiple camps. And on Towers of Doom, you want to secure that bottom fort and just hold it so that you get more shots because it's very difficult to take back. And there's the constant threat of sappers. So you need to define, when you're looking at a map, what the win condition for the map is. How are you going to open up the map in such a way that you can get to the core and end the game? And then how are you going to continue to make sure you get an experience advantage over the enemy team, or at least stay even with the enemy team constantly? And those are the things you have to think about. So soak and win conditions, very, very important. Talking about Infernal Shrines, Infernal Shrines is like a really interesting map because it's very possible to completely ignore the objective and scale in the late game. Ratting is very possible in Infernal Shrines. For those of you who don't know, there's a term in Dota, it's called Rat Dota, where you basically ignore the enemy team and just gnaw away at their buildings constantly. And you're essentially out-rotating or out-macroing them. Triple Global from Fnatic is a good example of this. The Samuro strat on Sky Temple, where you just shove buildings really hard and have an Abathur and clone the Samuro on core and he ends the game, is a really good example of this. And we've seen games in professional play quite a few times at this point where you have something like a TAS Tracer double warrior. So Tracer's your only damage dealer, which is fine if she's like level 16 plus, but it sucks before level 16. And what they do is they just ignore the objective completely, make sure they're soaking every single lane. That goes back to XP economy. And then once they're 16, they fight, they win, and then they just go in the game like immediately.
We actually had an example of that in the recent tournament with, I believe it was Dignitas, right? Where they kind of lost every single... they didn't even lost. They didn't even try to contest it for the most part, right?
Can you lose something if you don't fight for it? That's the real question.
That's a good point. But they kind of stole out the game until the late game. Then they had an Abathur and a Tracer, and they won a team fight and ended. So...
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And Genji actually did it to Dignitas at mid-season brawl as well earlier on in the tournament. So it's something that happens. Oh, no, wait. Was it Dig? I think it might have been Dig. But it's something that happens fairly consistently. Dig is especially known for this because they'll often, back in the day, they often did it with Stitches comps. The value of Stitches is he's really good at securing picks. Picks only matter when death timers are long. So they would draw Stitches comps, they would AFK until the late game, they would get one hook, and then they would be able to snowball the game from that one hook because they would have all their lanes pushed up because they'd been soaking the entire time. They would get the objective, and they would be able to push for a structure advantage and then end. So talking about Infernal Shrines, you essentially have two styles of compositions that are viable on the map. One of them is push and objective control. And you're like, we're just going to win the objective. Good example of this, Alexstrasza and Alexstrasza. Like people draft Alexstrasza, you pop Dragon, you win the Shrine. The extreme version of this is something like Diva plus Alex plus Tychus plus Ragnaros. And you essentially have 4 cooldowns, Odin, Ragfort, Dragon, and Diva self-destruct, that will secure roughly 10 Shrine minions. You need 40 to get the Shrine. Do it correctly, that's 40 Shrine minions. You will win every single Shrine no matter what. And then the question is, how do you push with it? How do you generate an advantage from pushing with it? And it's worth noting that, especially since the towers change, on average, unless you have like a very specific composition, if the Punisher is defended correctly, it will not get more than a wall. It can get a fort if the wall's already dead, but it will not get more than a wall in most cases. So pushing with the Punisher is not, especially the first one's not a good idea. You need to make sure all lanes are soaked for both teams, whether you win it or you lose the Punisher. That goes back to XP economy. Since you're not going to get a significant experience advantage from pushing with the Punisher, all lanes need to be soaked so you don't actually fall behind, even if you win it. And we've seen more and more and more in pro play, especially when teams draft Alex Straza, teams will just give. They'll be like, okay, you drafted Alex, we're not going to contest that until we're 10. You get at the first objective for free, that's fine. We're going to make sure we're soaking and pushing all the lanes. And teams basically end up even in experience, despite the fact that one of them got a Punisher. But that's the first one, right? It's objective, control the objective, get it for free every time, and then push with it. But you have to have some way of generating advantage with the push. Sylvanas is like an easy example of how to generate more than average value with a push, but Sylvanas is nerfed in a rather dramatic way. Having a stun composition so that you can secure kills over the wall off of the Punisher jumps. This used to be called fishing with Kerrigan, because someone would jump the wall and Kerrigan could combo through the wall to pull them back to the gate and combo them and then ravage over. And then teams could dive with her. Medivh is a hero that can take the entire team across the wall and sort of fight with the Punisher. So if you have an objective control comp, the enemy team can completely negate it just by not fighting over the objective and clearing the Punisher safely. You need something in addition to that to push, and that can be difficult to learn how to do. Pushing with the Punisher really well and securing kills off of it is actually harder than getting the Punisher.
Yeah, and we have seen teams, if you watch mostly in the pro scene, quickly break down the small wall on the fort just so they can get inside and follow the Punisher once he gets the jump in on a hero, because it is one of the abilities he's going to do is jump on a hero immediately at the beginning. So
that's absolutely true. If you're pushing with the Punisher, you need to kill the sidewalls first to make sure you can get in there and fight with the Punisher. And you really should be, like, if you're going to get the Punisher, you're going to have that style of combat, you should be fighting with the Punisher. You should not focus on the buildings so much as focusing on kills, because if you get the kills, they'll get you the buildings. And then if you're defending the Punisher, you want to bait it as far back as possible. A good example of this is, especially when you're defending keeps, say you're defending top keep, you want to bait the Punisher to mid keep. You want to try to split the Punisher from the team that's pushing with the Punisher and put them in a situation where they want to get the structure advantage. They need to not fight with the Punisher, so you get to clear the Punisher for free, and it lessens the chance of dying. And then this is these are kind of the same thing, but it's comps that ignore the objective, and either they're focusing on ratting, they're really just trying to open up a structures the old-fashioned way. They're just like, we're going to push here, we're going to do this while you do that. We're going to get camps at certain times. And the thing is, rat comps and scale comps until the very late game play exactly the same, because rat comps are always going to be going for the structure advantage. We've never seen Juice Pirates on Infernal Shrines in competitive play, but Juice Pirates does work on Infernal Shrines. Believe it or not, it can be a really strong composition, because you can usually, if you have a lot of push, get a fort relatively early on in a lane, as long as you just opt to push the opposite lane from wherever the first objective is going to spawn. And then scaling, you do that exact same thing, except eventually you hit some sort of power spike where you're like, oh, we can win the team fight now. And then you go and win the team fight. So you don't have to win the first Punisher on Infernal Shrines. It's not a map where the objective is the most impactful, but it's a map where the level of the play of the team can sort of dictate how impactful it is, because they know when they need to soak. They know when they need to do something like called pre-pushing, where if the enemy team is giving the objective, you leave one person on the objective who can solo it, and the other three or four people should just push the lane as hard as they can so that the minion wave is pushed really far up. Damage to the wall has already been done, so the wall's not a safety net, and then you can get more out of the Punisher. This is something that, for instance, Liquid did not do a couple weeks ago on Infernal Shrines. They had a hammer comp, and they were essentially winning every objective, but the objectives were being conceded, and they didn't push with the hammer to get the fort value and get the wall value. And Dig had a level 20 composition, and when they hit level 20, the game ended. And Liquid needed to get a tempo advantage from pushing harder than they were, and they did not. They did not play to their comp's win condition on the map.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. We did mention them at the early game when Dignitas were the one looking for the late game, and We can see that also it works from the other side. If your team has a composition that should work with the objective, you should utilize it probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So in broad terms, it's objective comps that also have push, and scaling comps that just sort of win the late game team fight, and otherwise you're just AFK soaking lanes until the late game. That is Infernal Shrines.
Yeah.
And it works particularly because the timing between objectives on Infernal Shrines is so long. It's 3 minutes. So like if the objective finishes at 7, both teams will be 10 for the next objective. I think the average in professional play is only like 3.1 or 3.2 Punishers gotten too. So it's not very many. You only have to deal with the objective a few times, and generally by the third one you're level 16, which is when most scaling compositions have enough of their essential power spikes to go in and win the fight.
No, that's actually a good point. Kind of as a small note there, even though you can ignore the Punisher on the Infernal Shrine, you should really know when to do that. We actually have seen, I believe it was in NA, correct me if it's wrong, the Tempo Storm game where they ignored the Arcane Punisher. I believe it's because it was an Arcane Punisher. They ignored the Punisher and it cost them the game. So
it did. And late game Punishers, it's every objective scales with game time. So later on in the game, ignoring the Punisher is dangerous. It's just it works. But certainly in the early game, the first couple, I think that was actually the 5th Punisher of the game, to give you guys an idea of how far out of the average that was. That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, add on top of it the fact that it was actually an Arcane Punisher, probably caused them to miscalculate it. Quite unfortunate though. Anyway, so I guess we can jump to the next map. It's actually been already 20 minutes and it's only one map we've covered. Cav.
Well, we covered some basic concepts of how we're going to think about these questions. That helps.
That does help indeed. So the next map I'd like to talk about is going to be Battlefield of Eternity. And that is one of the more unique maps, I would say, when you're looking at the map pool of Heroes of the Storm. It has a pretty damn good objective. Actually, might be in certain scenarios too good for the game's health, some would say. And we have seen games that end really quickly on Battlefield of Eternity. And, I mean, that is something to consider. So Battlefield of Eternity has a few aspects to it that you need to consider because the objective is so strong. Arguably the strongest objective in the game out of all the maps. Cav, maybe you can go over through what we need to consider when we're talking about Battlefield of Eternity.
So Battlefield of Eternity, in broad terms, breaks down to, again, it's just 2 styles of composition. On most maps, there's only really 2 styles of composition. It's not like a one beats one. It comes down to certain factors in each one. But in broad strokes, you can break down Battlefield of Eternity into race, where your objective is to race the mortal down as quickly as possible. You have better race than the enemy team. And you don't need a Hanzo or a Raynor or a Artanis to necessarily have a race comp. In an ideal world, you would look at your team, look at the enemy team, and be like, oh, we have better race. Even if our comp is like awful at racing, it's still better than theirs. So we're the race comp. And then that's versus side soak and defend. So the enemy team, since they have worse race, they can't win it just by racing. They need to defend their immortal. But if both teams are just AFK defending, eventually the race team is going to win purely via like some kind of poke ability. Like every comp has arranged something in the game, and if it went on forever, they would win it just by poke. So you need to be getting an advantage outside of we're just defending, and that comes down to side soak. Abathur used to be a really popular hero on Battlefield Eternity, believe it or not, because he was one of the few heroes that could side soak 2 lanes. He can body soak one, hat soak the other. HHE actually played Vikings in their run up through Open Division to become, enter the Crucible and come into the official HGC. Fun fact about Vikings, 3 of them together do as much damage as a Greymane without Inner Beast up. So they're actually not bad race, and they can soak both lanes. And basically, and you have this race versus side soak dynamic. You again have a situation where The defend comp either needs immediate pick potential. A good example of this is Alterac. You'll see occasionally Alterac on BOE. And the nice thing about Alterac on BOE is he can pull people into the immortal stuns, and then that gives you a free stun onto a focus target, and then you can also silence them. So you need some sort of pick potential with the defend style composition, or you need some significant scaling advantage. Last year, Roll20 pulled out a really interesting comp on BOE that was actually Rag Artanis, and it was into Li Ming, and basically post 13, Artanis and Rag were both unkillable. Artanis had phase bulwark for the spell armor. Rag had the old version of his armor on stun talent into an ETC, and both of them could just absolutely run it down. They gave the first, two immortals, but it didn't matter because they had Rag's fort for the defense. And so that's the element again of Battlefield of Eternity, and there's sort of a theme you guys are seeing popping up here in terms of maps. There's comps that focus on maximizing the value of the objective, and there's comps that focus on, we're going to lose the objective, but we have some sort of late game advantage that's going to allow us to win the game. And understanding, what kind of comp you have is really, really important. So that's Battlefield of Eternity. It's race versus side soaking and defending and getting some sort of scaling advantage. Pick comps in general are always a scaling comp because the longer death timers get, the more impactful picks become. So you just need to make sure you're keeping up if you have some sort of kill composition.
And kind of, I want to ask you a few questions. So when exactly do you determine when you can draft for a late game comp? Because on Battlefield of Eternity, it is considered a fairly early game map. And again, we have seen games end up there quite quickly. So when do you take the maybe risk, if you do will, to draft for a late game comp?
On BOE in particular, I personally wouldn't draft for later than level 13. I think 13 is an acceptable level to power spike at, because the first immortal, if you defend it for a while correctly and safely, both teams are going to be level 9 or 10 when it goes down. Both teams will be definitely level 10 for the spawning of the next objective, probably in the 11 to 12 range. And then by the time you're halfway through the 13th Immortal, if you've been side soaking this entire time, you should be 13. The problem that most people run into drafting late game compositions is they play them like they're race comps, or they don't prioritize making sure they consistently have soak so that they can continue to level up as quickly as possible to get to their necessary power spikes. They're just like, oh, we should bite. And it turns out if you go into a game that requires strategy and you fiesta instead, it doesn't work.
I mean, all due respect, fiesta does work, Cav. Come on, you should know. You're coaching a fiesta UT. Jokes aside, though, we have a question from chat. Cascon56 asking, how's Samuro on Battlefield of Eternity? He has good race and can side soak post 10.
Samuro's fine on BOE. The major problem with Samuro at all when you're talking about him is that his team fight is really weak until 16. He just doesn't do enough damage to be a major threat to the backline, and he's very hard to play. In the time it takes to get good at Samuro, your average pro player could be good at 3 other heroes instead, and those heroes would probably be less niche. So it's just a question. That's why we don't see it in pro play. We started to see it in pro play once Monkey actually started playing it in open division in EU, because pros saw it and was like, oh, that's really good. That might be worth investing in. And they started practicing it. They realized it was really hard and they stopped practicing it. But it's most heroes in the game are fairly viable. It's just you won't see them in pro play necessarily because pros are inherently very conservative because they want to keep their jobs, and winning matches really matters to them. So they try to focus on as small a hero pool as possible. Teams that have focused on very large hero pools historically in the past have done very poorly. The record for this, I believe, is Tempest 2016. Ran up to a world championship where each player only played 3 heroes the entire tournament.
Wow. Okay. So generally speaking, on Battlefield of Eternity, what heroes could you suggest that people normally don't think about on that map? Something again like Samuro. Normally people don't think about him there, but
that people don't think about is an interesting question.
Yeah, because normally people, when you go to Battlefield of Eternity, you normally draft very, I don't want to say vanilla, but very normal heroes like Hanzo. He goes there. We do see sometimes Zavala there with the gear build, Greymane, Raynor, of course, nowadays. Do you have any kind of heroes that people normally don't think about that actually can work there?
Raynor with Exterminator is a big one. He actually, excuse me, he actually is the second best race after Hanzo.
That's a good point.
With Exterminator specifically. Obviously, if you're going for a race comp, there's a very short list of heroes that are good at racing, right? Samuro is one, Ball with Q-Build is one, Artanis with Amateur Opponent is one. All of the mages, except for Li Ming, are bad because they're all basically cooldown locked. Li Ming is a bit of an exception because she has such short cooldowns. She has talents that sort of do a lot. Lunara is really good on BoE from 4 onwards with Nature's Culling. She has good race. She also has Wisp, which gives you a lot of vision control. There's a lot of bushes in the mid area, a lot of tight chokes, a lot of really scary things. For defense, the strongest thing you can have is displacement because, again, it allows you to fight with the Immortal and look for those big stuns. And then against displacement, Unstoppables are really good because they sort of deny armor, denies a lot of blowups. You can have burst save mechanics, but then burst save mechanics tend to come on heroes that have poor sustain healing, so you have to win fights very aggressively. But then you can even go double support. The main weakness of double support is the lack of laning, the lack of wave clear, the lack of PvE it gives you. But on Battlefield Eternity, it's a 2-lane map. You don't need that as much. So once you get into this dynamic of thinking of it as race versus side soak plus defending, you can be like, okay, this hero clearly falls in this category. And there's some heroes that do both. Tron is really good at defending because of the vision mechanic and the ability to help you blow someone up. But she's also really good at racing because she increases everyone's damage on the Immortal with Hunter's Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some interesting cross positions. Globals are really good for the side soak strategy always, because you can have like Falstad or Dahaka in a lane, and they can immediately come to defend the Immortal whenever the enemy team actually starts a fight and tries to push in and get some. So Western Clash last year, this isn't viable anymore. Well, it's not as good anymore. I shouldn't say it's not viable. But Western Clash this year, there was a strategy where one team drafted Nazebo on Battlefield Eternity, and all they did for their Immortal race was throw spiders at the Immortal on cooldown while the enemy team defended.
Huh.
That's all they did. They won the Immortal because of spiders. And they did nothing else to it. And it's like, you're gonna defend, and we're just gonna poke the Immortal down from out of your range from fog, and you're not gonna be able to stop it because you can't stop spiders. Even Li Ming has more counterplay than spiders, because spiders are not even blockable with like body shots or anything.
All right, but like you mentioned, this is not really a popular strategy anymore, and I guess especially
the spider build got nerfed.
Yeah.
Like if spider build still had the same level of damage, I think it would still work.
All right. I guess with that being said, we can jump to the next map. And the next map I'd like us to talk about is Braxis Holdout. And this is an interesting map because it has so many strategies to it, at least from what I've seen. Normally people look at the map and they think about, okay, Braxis Holdout, 1-4, let's go, solo, 4-man, let's get some wave clear, etc. But actually it can be a bit more complicated than that. Is that right, Cam?
Oh yeah. All right. So Braxis Holdout is not popular in the pro scene. I'm going to tell you guys that right now. And the reason it's not popular in the pro scene is because you actually can't break it down into these nice, neat little 2-thing categories that we've been talking about. For a long time, there were not 1, not 2, but 3 viable meta strategies on Braxis Holdout, and they were rock, paper, scissors. You had double global, which was a Fanatics credited with inventing it, and we'll just go with that. And basically, it was a really simple idea. You had a global in the 4-man, and you had a global in the off lane. And when the enemy team pushed up as in the 4-man, the top global would come down, and you would fight 5v4. And then as soon as the fight was over, the bottom global would go top and make sure no soak was missed. So you had this constant, this is when global cooldowns were shorter as well. Every like 50 seconds, you had a 5v4, and the offlane never got to push as a result of the global being forced to come down, because the other global would just go up and you would just constantly swap positions over and over and over again. This was known as the double global composition. It was essentially a 4-1, but with 2 globals. And it was very good, as it turned out. It was very frustrating to deal with. And what it countered the push composition. So this was when Zarya Medic was basically broken on Braxis, because if you got Zarya with Field of Heat and she just pushed up really hard, it was very difficult to go on the Zarya because she would trade very efficiently, and she could always have that medic healing her. And it was very difficult to kill the medic because she got ally shield from Zarya. She had peel, and basically the enemy team had more damage. And there were some rebalances. We ended up with 2 3s, and what would happen in a 2-3 is 2 people top would be able to push so hard that, because they were essentially 50% or 100% stronger than the one guy that was there, and you'd have a hero bottom to deny the push comp, like Chromie and or Diablo, or Garrosh when he came out, and because the bottom side couldn't push without giving the enemy team an advantage, and the top side could push harder 2v1 than the bottom side could push 4v3, 2-3 ruined the double global composition in a lot of ways. So you had 4-1 push, you had double global, still 4-1, and then you had 2-3. The solution to 2-3, this is still going, guys, this is still going, was what is called 1-3-1. And you would draft this traditional offlane, but then you would also draft a hero that was very, very safe to anchor the bottom lane. Good modern examples are Phoenix, Junkrat, Chromie is acceptable, Gul'dan is fine, and basically heroes with either incredible range, so they were super, super, super safe, or infinite self-sustain, so that they could very safely play the lane. Ideally, they would have an escape. Like Gul'dan has the self-sustain, but doesn't have an escape, but his wave clear is so intense that he doesn't have to step up very far or very often, so that's like the advantage there. And then you would have 3 people that just constantly roamed around. They would be wherever they needed to be to potentially secure an advantage. They could do camps. Greymane was really popular in 1-3-1s because he could do camps very, very efficiently. Murden is probably the best 1-3-1 warrior on Braxis holdout. And then there was Abba solo support. Now, the thing about 1-3-1s is they're very rotational. It really depends on having a man advantage somewhere, sometime. Abba, if you think about it, is the fastest global in the game. And if you're only going for fast fights, most supports don't matter on Braxis. Because if you're only going for fast fights, the lane sustain that supports normally give you are kind of irrelevant. You have higher globe income if you're winning because there's the bottom globe generator. Mm-hmm. You can back and get back to lane relatively quickly. So Abba solo support gave you vision control, so you knew where the enemy team was and what they were doing, which gave you better advantage in terms of controlling that 1-3-1. And then you had a healing assassin damage level, like assassin level damage, global on a 4-second cooldown, which, as it turns out, is pretty broken, and sort of shut down 1-3-1. But you know what's good against Abba? Push comps. and so we went back to the 4-1. So now we don't have rock, paper, scissors on Braxis. We have rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, for those of you who are familiar with the Big Bang Theory. And these strategies literally do counter each other. Every single one of those 5 metas on Braxis is hard countered by at least one of the others. And this is the second reason the teams don't like playing on Braxis, because you can lose in the draft more easily on Braxis holdout than on any other map. And in fact, in professional play, the largest discrepancy between first pick and second pick in terms of win rate is Braxis holdout. So why would you voluntarily pick a map where first pick has the greatest advantage of any map? And it's because first pick can sort of outline their strategy better. If they understand how to draft the map, they can pick which strategy they want. They can deny you the tools that you need even more easily now with 6 bans. Before it was only 4, before the second pick phase. And it's very hard to hide what you're doing on Braxis. Generally, the only way you can do it is if it's a surprise. So when Abathur Soulsport became known to some people, teams would take you to Braxis, and they would 3-4 ABBA, and you're like, oh, I don't know how to deal with that, and then you would lose because it beats a lot of the other strategies pretty convincingly.
Do you think any of those strategies have changed due to the changes with Braxis recently?
They have, and not so much the strategies have changed, but the heroes that are good at them have changed. So, for instance, Rexar is always really, really viable on Braxis because of his ability to hold the point and soak the lane at the same time. And there are heroes that, because of the way the contest mechanics work now, he's better against because the heroes can instantly get on the point, like Yrel. Yrel can clear the wave and then go back to the point, and she's in good shape. Heroes that can't clear the wave and sort of have to stand on the point have an even worse decision to make in a lot of ways. So like some of the dynamics have changed for individual matchups, but you're going to lose less with any of these strategies. That's the big change to Braxis, is that you're not going to be able to do any sort of 5-man push if you get a definitive advantage in the Zerg count or anything like that. You do have to defend the Zerg no matter what at this point.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. So it seems like Braxis is a lot more complicated than you'd initially think, and it actually makes drafting there very different, and that's actually very, very interesting.
Yeah, drafting Braxis, and it's, again, a lot of people don't like the map because you can actually win or lose it in the draft far more so than other maps.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a, without spoiling actually, it seems like whenever drafting becomes really complicated, pros would try to avoid it, the map itself, right? Whenever drafting on a map becomes really complicated, or maybe we get scenarios with a lot of rock paper scissors, Lizard, Spock. It seems like the pros would try to avoid it, and a map actually we're going to talk about is Cursed Hollow, and I think the way you draft on Cursed Hollow is also a bit more complicated than you'd initially think, mostly because of all the things you have on the map. You have not only your normal objective that exists there, but you also have the size of the map, which makes globals there very important, and maybe more importantly than anything else, you have 2 bosses there that quite often become a win condition.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Cursed Hollow is, you're talking about win conditions. When you're talking about XP economy, Curse usually, sometimes it doesn't really help you open up a win condition. It just helps you get ahead in experience. Bosses are the actual end on Cursed Hollow in most cases. I think even in like regular random hero league games, 30% of all games on Cursed Hollow end with a boss push. So that's a lot, considering that people don't even get bosses at the right times or for the right reasons in your average hero league game. You think about that. But on Cursed Hollow, you really need... It's not so much about what the enemy team is doing. In most cases, there are some niche pocket strategies on Cursed Hollow, like Vikings, which have to be responded to in a particular way. But what it comes down to in Cursed Hollow is you need a global, or you want a global, ideally, because the map is so incredibly large, and there's multiple things to fight over, generally. There's a lot of invade potential on both bosses and merc camps. There's the possibility of tribute spawns on one side of the map, boss spawns on the other side of the map. You want to get both. How do you do that? Well, globals help you do that. Mercability. I won't say there's a lot of merc camps in Cursed Hollow, but because of the size of Cursed Hollow, and because of the way the laning arrangements usually work around tributes, mercs get an abnormal amount of value on Cursed Hollow, because generally only one person is going to be dealing with them, and generally if you have one person, maybe you're global, pushing with them, that's going to be a 1v1, but one person has a camp and one does not. And so you have that pressure. Also, if you don't have merc ability, the enemy team can come in and sneak your mercs, and that gives you something to deal with whether you want to or not. And the third thing is some kind of boss control, whether it's race, like a Hanzo, whether it's vision, like an Abathur or a Medivh, so you know when they're doing the boss, or whether or not, and if you have vision, you generally also need some kind of steal potential, leyline seal, um,
Holy ground.
devouring, holy ground, devouring maw is a classic one, even though no one uses it anymore. But like you need some sort of way to steal the boss. Know they're doing it. Have a steal mechanic. Go to the boss, steal it, and just really good team fight can be technically be a steal condition as long as the enemy team doesn't have sufficient knockbacks or securing mechanics of their own. And I did an analysis once, and I'm curious this is still true, and I might actually go back and do it again. But last year I did an analysis on Cursed Hollow win rates, and there was not a single team composition in professional play that did not have at least 2 out of 3 of these that won. And if I found a draft where one team had only one or none of that list, they lost 100% of the time.
Wow. Okay.
So professional play, these things matter. They're really, really important. I'm actually curious. I'm going to go back and do the analysis again and see if it's still the case. I feel like it should be because I don't feel like the map has changed very much. But you need these things. If you think about Infernal Shrines, we talk about drafting Dragon. Drafting Alexstrasza to win the objective. The objective on Cursed Hollow is the bosses. We've seen Fnatic actually give up every single tribute and end up ahead. Fnatic got a keep during the enemy team's curse in a game. You know what they had? They had globals and they had boss control. Those are the things that they had. They had Merc ability, right? Even they had Falsad with Bribe, I think, in that game. So you need these things. The attributes can matter or cannot matter depending on your strategy, but the bosses always matter.
That is very true. So again, coming back to what I initially said, would you attribute the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cursed Hollow is one of the least played map in the pro scene. Is that true?
It is now.
It is now. And it's since Hanzo.
Cursed Hollow's popularity went down dramatically with the release of Hanzo and the realization that W build could do boss in like 6 to 8 seconds if you had perfect arrow control. And as it turns out, this whole dynamic of getting to the boss on time when the enemy team has a Hanzo is very difficult to deal with. Yeah. It becomes basically impossible because you're like, normally if someone's missing from the map for like 3-4 seconds, you're like, they're in a bush. 5-6 seconds, you're like, they're on boss. Now, if it takes you 5 or 6 seconds to realize they're on boss, and it takes them like 6 seconds to get to boss, and then it takes you another like 7 seconds, boss is done. Like, ideal scenario where you're playing perfectly and you're already like in a position where you can rotate to the available boss is already done. Yeah. And then you start your boss realizing that they're missing, but then they get there in time to contest you, and then they take that boss and they have double boss. Hanzo is very difficult to beat on Cursed Hollow. I actually expect the popularity will come back a little bit with the set of extra bans, because even though you can ban more of the counters to Hanzo, second pick can always just ban Hanzo, and they don't feel too bad about it.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But then would you say that the lack of popularity of Cursed Hollow is because the combination of everything? You need to cover the global, you need to have some kind of mercability, you need to have some kind of boss race and control and vision around that. Is it because it's so complicated to draft on that map that it has seen less and less play?
I mean, I think that's part of it. I also wouldn't necessarily say it's complicated. I would say that it is very difficult because supports lost all their PvE. Right? Every single support back in December, the support changes lost all their PvE. So the supports are gone from consideration unless you're running Soul Support Abathur or Brightwing, who is a global. And in fact, we saw Brightwing in Korea as the global. And
she has boss control actually. So
from Supernova, and yeah, she does. She has boss control. They won that game, and those were the things they exploited. So if you remove Brightwing and Abathur from the equation, no other supports really have great PvE. You can argue that Kharazim and Rhaegar have okay merking. It's not great, but it's okay. So you have these 3 things that you kind of want to have, and you have 4 hero spots to get them. That's hard, because not only do you have to have all these things, you have to build a reasonable composition that has self synergy, and there's actually not that many heroes, especially meta heroes, that do those different things. So if they're banned or taken by the other team, you can be in a lot of trouble. And so Cursed Hollow, it's not good for teams that have small hero pools, which A lot of teams intentionally have small hero pools because they're trying to focus on being as good as they can in a small selection of heroes. It's not good for teams that don't play some of the other meta picks, like a Medivh team. Medivh's really going to curse Hollow because he gives you 2 out of 3. He gives you Vision and Boss Steal, right? He gives you one of the things you need absolutely 100% of the time in one hero. That's really good, but if you're not a Medivh team, and Medivh is hard to play and play with, that's an issue. Illidan is out of the meta. Illidan gives you mercability and potentially global. Dahaka is very, very meta, but it's also a priority ban. Abba is very meta, but he's also a high priority ban. So yeah, it's a hard map to draft with for a lot of teams just because of hero pool issues or wanting these things but not having the ability to draft like specific things that they want to get them.
Okay, fantastic. So without talking too much more on Cursed Hollow, let's jump to the next map. And this is going to be my favorite map, personally. Dragon Shire. And the reason why I personally do like the map is because it has a lot of things that I personally like when I'm playing this game. It has the rotation potential, it has the 3 lanes, so it's not a very small map. It has the 1v1, which is, oftentimes not a very honorable 1v1. There's tourism, but it does exist in that map, and it has a decent amount of camps overall that you can take, steal, and push with. What are your thoughts about Dragon Shire in general, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the rotations going on there and the shrine control that is actually quite important there.
So I want to make a note about Dragon Shire in pro play. A lot of casters at MSB made a big deal that this team or that team were undefeated on Dragon Shire in the regular season. And basically every top team in every region is undefeated or has a very good record on Dragon Shire. ATG, Tempo Storm, Dignitas, Genji, they all have a very high win rate on Dragon Shire, higher than their average win rate across other maps. And it really comes down to Dragon Shire is a map where the better team, and I say the better team in terms of decision making, wins consistently. And the reason is Dragon Shire is just a rotational map. It is probably the most rotational map in the game. So if you understand rotations and how to generate advantages from rotations, you will win Dragon Shire. And it's not a map where you can get held up on the objective, because people who overfocus the objective often end up losing to, one shrine being taken back at a bad time and then they don't get it. But meanwhile, the enemy team has gotten a camp out and that camp's pushing. Now they have to deal with the camp, and then whoops, you lost both towers for a second because you weren't noticing, and they got the Dragon Knight. So it's all about having the right people in the right place at the right time. And there's some wonky comps that have won on Dragon Shire. China had a game, a Chinese team, I should say, had a game at BlizzCon last year where they drafted Murky to counter Dahaka on Dragon Shire. And what the Murky did, and this really happened, is in the late game, he would rotate for team fights, die on purpose, and use that as a global to get back to top lane to resecure the top shrine. And Dahaka could not get back in time because Dahaka had burrowed out to the fight.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did this over and over and over, literally into the towers to die as Murky. And they won that game.
I think there's a particular individual who'd be interested in that. Inting is a legit strategy.
And so Dragon Shire is all about rotating around the map and generating small advantages while holding one shrine or holding middle so that it can't be capped for the end game. That's all you need to do. Clear the waves, rotate around the map, be in the right place at the right time. And I say that's all you need to do, like that's easy. It's actually very difficult. And you need to understand if you have a late game call where you're trying to scale, in which case you're just trying to ignore the objective, not let the enemy team get it, but not try to get it yourself. You're trying to get your camps out so that the enemy team can't steal them. Early game comps generally want to look for invades. They want to be like, are they uneasies? Are they on siege? Let's go do siege. Is the off lane overextended top? Let's go kill top lane. One of the, Dread has a criticism every time he sees Zeratul drafted on Dragon Shire, which is that Zeratul's playstyle in Dragon Shire is really one-dimensional. You're always trying to gank top because it's really hard to gank anyone in the 4-man. Right? Dig has a very particular style playing Dragon Shire. They always do a 1-3-1. They have a really strong top lane that either wins or ties the matchup. Wubby knows every single matchup, so that's very easy for them to work out in the draft. And they have a roaming hero in the 3-man. So they have a support, a stun tank, and a roaming hero like Maiev, Zeratul, Genji, Tracer. And then they have a anchor hero for bottom, who has a vision mechanic and therefore is very, very safe on their own. Chromie, Junkrat, Hanzo. And then they just they clear mid with the 3-man. And then sometimes the 3-man splits and does different things. Sometimes the 3-man all rotates together. But they're really just clear mid, find something to do in the window where they have 30 seconds until they have to be back mid again to look for the thing. That's all they do. They just clear mid and rotate, clear mid and rotate, clear mid and rotate. That's the entirety of their game plan. And that's why Dragonshire is such a complicated map, because it's not about this style of comp versus that style of comp. And, it's really just you need to be in the right place at the right time without missing any soak.
So would you say that the backbone of most draft on Dragonshire should be wave clear? Wave clears enable rotation. And I guess this makes sense why I like this map so much, because I'm a Gul'dan main, or at least he's my most played hero, and I guess it kind of makes sense now. But would you agree that the backbone should be wave clear on the map?
Yeah, because the way you say it is the way I always like to say it. Wave clear enables rotations. You cannot leave the lane until the wave is clear. So the faster you clear the lane, the sooner you can rotate and be out of vision and be doing something else on the map. So you do need some kind of wave clear, especially in the 4-man. Ideally, you have a wave clear offlaner. For instance, I'm not a big fan of Thrall. Thrall has a lot of heroes that he duels well on the point, especially post 7. I don't like Thrall on Dragonshire unless you're trying to run some sort of level 20 composition where you're just like, yeah, we're conceding top point. We'll just hold bottom the entire time. HHE ran double support on Dragonshire once and with Thrall top, and they got 20 and ran it down bottom. They were just like, okay, we have 20 now. We have double support. We're going to stay in bot lane as 5 until we end the game. And that's actually what they did. Octalis has made a mistake of fighting them 19 to 18 because they were behind the entire game, as they should be. But they managed to get 20 and come back because Octalis has given them some free unnecessary kills. And then they hit their win condition, which was get 20 and run it down bottom. We've seen the triple camp. Oh, it's also worth noting that Dragonshire, the general win condition is bottom lane. Because of the triple camp, you have 2 siege camps and the bottom bruiser camp. So you're trying to end bottom, trying to open up that lane more than other lanes. If you have a choice, like you could kill mid 4, you could kill bot 4, you should be killing bottom 4 once you have that advantage. But generating advantage on Dragonshire is all about rotations.
Yeah, and if you look at the professional scene, you will notice that in almost every case, they will take the Dragon Knight to the bottom lane just to open it up and allow for those Merc camps to be their late game win condition when need be. You just see them that they mostly ignore the top lane. They sometimes get the mid for the experience, but for the most part, they will have heavy focus on the bot lane. And yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense. All right. I guess this was a pretty short one on Dragonshire. It's pretty straight to the point. Get your rotation, guys. Wave clear is key there. Don't expect honorable 1v1. It's probably not going to happen.
I will add one more Dragonshire note because people love hearing this. There's 3 bushes, and you can see in the mid between between mid and bottom that sort of define a triangle. This actually has a name. It's called the Triangle of Death. And because you're constantly rotating through here, if the enemy team is waiting in one of these bushes and you don't realize it, you die. So it's called the Triangle of Death, and on pro comms, this is almost always abbreviated to try. So if you hear people talking about try on Dragonshire, this is what they're referring to. Some teams call it other things. Like generally teams, one of the things you'll notice about pro comms, if you listen to them for a while, is that people will try to find ways to abbreviate everything to one syllable. So this becomes try. Octalis calls the siege giants lobsters, but they abbreviate it to lob because it's one syllable. So just short and sweet is what you're going for on comms. But controlling try is a big deal because it means your rotation is always 100% safe.
Fantastic. The next map we're going to talk about is actually I think it is the second most played map in Heroes Lounge, and it is an interesting one. It is an interesting one because the way the minion waves work there is a bit different and a bit unique, and it's going to be Tomb of the Spider Queen. And the reason why I'm saying it's unique is because the objective is actually tied to the minion waves. You need to have some ability to collect the gems out of the spider minions. they probably have an official name, but you need to have an ability to collect the gems, and turning the gems to get the objective is very important, which then brings you to another point. Wave clear is important there. Vision is just as important, if not more important, on Tomb of the Spider Queen. Cav, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Tomb of the Spider Queen is actually kind of it's a funny map, and it's a funny map for one major reason, which is it's not necessarily the amount of wave clear you have, because there's only so many waves. It's a four, like unmounted or mounted. If you count the mount time or you count the walking time, it's a 4-second rotation from mid to top if you just walk straight there. And you're clearing a wave every 15 seconds, and then you have to walk back. So that's, out of a 30-second rotation, you're walking for 8 of it. But if you clear the wave in 2 seconds in both cases, and which is quite doable with a lot of heroes, Task Storm plus Johanna W plus Chromie W, take your pick, generally 2 wave clear abilities, the wave gets cleared instantly. You then have something like 18 seconds of actually nothing to do. You just like, okay, the waves are cleared, we picked up all the gems, we got the globe, what do we do now? And what it comes down to on Tomb of the Spider Queen is not just how much wave clear you have, it's how fast is your wave clear relative to the enemy teams. So we've had these situations in pro play where one team drafted a team fight composition with very little wave clear, and one team drafted a wave clear composition. And unless you consistently kill the wave clear heroes, the wave clear composition can just clear and rotate, clear and rotate, clear and rotate, clear and rotate, clear and rotate. And the other team ends up so far behind. There was even a game earlier this year where a team drafted Zool, and they drafted Tychus for Odin to defend the web weavers, and they drafted other wave clear heroes, and they just let the enemy team turn in. They didn't even try to fight it. They just let them turn in. And despite the enemy team getting I think it was 4 turn-ins, they didn't lose a single keep.
Huh. Did they win?
They did. They eventually won the game because they piled up gems all game, and they won one team fight and got 2 turn-ins in a row. And then because they had wave clear and the enemy team didn't, all the waves were pushed really far, and the web weavers got a ton of value. I think that game would have gone differently if the enemy Leoric had gone silence on the Entomb, but that wasn't met at the time. Because there was a 3-man Entomb. If that had been silence, it would have been really good. But the point is that they didn't. That clumping as 3 was a mistake there anyway, right? Yeah. So you can actually win Tomb with just wave clear. You can even give turn-in, and it doesn't matter if you have enough wave clear. If your wave clear is that much higher than enemy teams, which means that any draft on Tomb needs to consider having a lot of wave clear just in case you end up in that situation. And the second thing that does matter on Tomb of the Spider Queen, if wave clear is closer to even, is vision mechanics, as we were talking about. You need to be able to look at turn-ins consistently. It is worth noting that wave clear gives vision in 2 ways. It pushes the minion wave up, which gives you vision of the lane. If your wave is pushed and they haven't cleared it yet, you can see the entire lane because the minions give you vision. And it gives you time, that 18 seconds that I was talking about. That's 18 seconds that someone can AFK in a bush right next to turn-in, and then you know for a fact if anyone is turning in. It also means that you're less likely to lose gems if you take that time to drop your gems safely. If you have 18 seconds on every single rotation and you drop your gems every single time and you die, you're never going to lose gems. Your team will never lose gems in that scenario. Going after people who have gems is a really good way of sort of shutting down late game comeback potential when you're winning the game. If the enemy team doesn't have gems, they can never get a turn in, they can never come back. But you can also use that, and then you generally use that window, that advantage of having wave clear, to do a camp. You sneak someone bottom and do siege, you sneak someone to do bruisers, and then you use the bruisers of the siege to force the enemy team to go deal with that, and then you turn in for free. So wave clear is just a way of winning Tomb. It's also a way of not losing Tomb until the very, very late game, which means you can draft scaling comps as long as your scaling comp has wave clear. Tassadar, for instance, has some absurd win rate. I'm going to look this up. I looked this up yesterday and totally forgot the number. I told myself I wouldn't forget the number.
we have seen in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have seen on Tomb of Spider Queen, Rag, Nazebo together being drafted because of the Rag wave clear, plus his ability to deny the objective, and then you have, Nazebo 20, GG, go next. Pretty much we've seen those two that are not quite meta anymore, but we have seen them being drafted as a duo on that map.
That was in fact a meta for quite a long time, and it was kind of insane. Wow, I don't like this new Master League thing. So Tassadar is the second most banned, or the top second banned hero, 58% on Tomb in pro play. He only has a 53% win rate.
What about Hanzo?
Hanzo apparently has a 43% win rate. Hanzo's win rate is not fantastic.
I mean, I would just assume that he should be somewhere at the top just because of his vision on the map.
Yeah.
It'd be quite fantastic.
But it's worth noting, I think it's really important, even when Johanna's not in the meta, Johanna's win rate in pro play is usually pretty close to 50%, but it's usually under 50 on almost every map except Tomb. So Johanna as a tank offers only wave clear. That's really her main thing that she offers. And this is the only map where she consistently has a high win rate in professional play.
Makes sense. So wave clear
gives you an idea of how important wave clear is.
Yeah, so wave clear is super important on Tomb of the Spider Queen, and I guess the speed at which you clear the wave is as important, if not more. And I mean, we have seen it, at least I know from my memory, so again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have seen a lot of focus on vision coming, especially from the Korean team, and I oftentimes, when I watch them play, they would just continuously deny turn-in of gems from their opponent while getting the turn-ins themselves, and they would just snowball the game like that because they get turn-ins, they get the objective, their opponents don't, and that's sheerly done because they have vision everywhere. They cover both the turn-ins, they cover the middle lane, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Like, you would expect Hans to have a really high win rate on the map because he has wave clear at 4, and then he also has the vision mechanic built in. Tassadar has wave clear and a vision mechanic built in with his D. Medivh does not have wave clear, but he has a lot of vision tools. Zul has incredible wave clear. Genji
Probius
kind of has a vision mechanic. Probius is not that bad.
I didn't say he's
Tomb of the Spider Queen. He's actually the crazy thing about Probius is that he scales at 5% on all its damaging abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts out being able to one-shot waves with 2 Ws, and eventually he reaches a point where he can one-shot waves with 1 W. And Probius is essentially all the macro you need in a 4-man. He can clear both waves, use that 18 seconds to literally go solo a camp, and be back in time for the next wave. He's literally all of the macro you need for a 4-man. And the other 4 heroes in your comp can be like your offlane, and then your support and your tank, but your damage can be literally anything you wanted. I would not be surprised if Probius got played more with the increase in bans, because the major threats to him can be banned away.
Reach just played Hearly game is Probius and their team owned. I mean,
yeah, there are. I'm aware of at least 6 professional range players who are learning to play Probius because they think he'll be viable with the additional bans, and there probably are more.
Interesting, nice. I mean, we have seen Probius on Sky Temple, if I remember correctly, rotating bot mid, but it was quite a while ago, and I mean, I guess we can save it to Sky Temple when we talk about the map, but kind of just my memory jumped when we talked about Probius, so.
That was an ADRD strat.
Yeah. All right.
That was really clean. The reason that okay, we'll talk about Sky Temple.
All right, let's save it. So the next map we're gonna talk about is going to be Towers of Doom, and this is a unique map. Again, I mean, I guess I can say on almost every map it's a unique map. It's a unique map because they mostly are in one way or another. But what's unique about Towers of Doom is your inability to directly interact with the core, which actually makes it a pretty fantastic late game map, generally speaking. What are your thoughts about that?
It's interesting.
And I guess I just want to add, this is the one map where you can say you can always come back, because even with 1 point on core, your core is still not interactable at all, unless of course objective or boss. So
it's interesting because when Towers of Doom first came out, a lot of people were like, this map is so incredibly snowbally. Whoever channels the altars just sort of wins. And then pros got a hold of it and were like, oh man, this map's great. It's all about macro. And the community was like, what? Why aren't you fighting? 40-0 never forget. But Tempo Storm, drafted Asmo on this map, and that Asmo comp works. And basically, what it does is you don't let the enemy team cap your altar, and you scale into the very, very late game. You just make sure they don't cap your altar. The problem here, and Tempo didn't know this at the time, was that exact strat was thought up by ADRD as well. Independent invention is a wonderful thing. So Fnatic actually had a lot of practice against it. And they sort of saw it coming in the draft because they knew, right, that they've seen it before. But Towers of Doom is literally only about team fighting and killing minion waves. That's it. It's the entirety of the map. It's a very, 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 very team fighter oriented map because you're going to get to a point in the game where team fights have to happen. Now, early team fights don't need to happen. So now you're in a situation where, we're all about team fighting and we're all about late game scaling. The only punish that exists for late game team fights or late game comps on Towers of Doom is securing structures before those teams hit their power spike. So if you get bottom, you're threatening 6 shots from the sapper camps if you can push them in. And you get the experience from capping the tower. If the enemy team can't take it back, they can't sort of negate that advantage. And it gives you free altars in the bottom. Those bottom 2 altars are basically impossible to contest if the altar is taken. So you need enough wave clear, enough anti-siege mechanics, such that can never happen. Stukov is really popular on Towers of Doom for late game team fight compositions because he silences the sappers and they don't collapse, which gives your team a chance to kill them before they actually do any damage. So if you have a late game team fight comp and the enemy team has early game mercability and they constantly get sappers and you have Stukov, you can completely negate the sappers.
Yeah, and this, I guess, is something most people didn't know. You can actually silence the sappers and they won't blow up on the structures. So.
Yeah, because it's actually a spell that they cast. Their little charge is a spell. So if they're silenced, they can't cast it.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's the entirety of Towers of Doom. It's literally you macro to the late game, you win a team fight, you get as many structures as you can get, and then you hold those structures until the game ends.
This actually makes it so that heroes that can double soak are quite valuable here. I know this because while my most played hero is Gul'dan, I'm actually, I would say, a melee main close to it, and my most played melee is Leoric, and one of the best things, or one of the things I like the most to do on Towers of Doom is somehow get my team to let me double soak after 4. Is that something to consider?
I'm very sad right now.
Why?
Because Leoric can only double soak with a wonderful talent level 4 called Kneel Peasants.
Yeah.
And that talent actually has the lowest win rate. On Hero League, even in Master Hero League, it has the lowest win rate. And the reason's really simple. The talent doesn't actually help you clear a single lane much faster. So if you're just 1v1ing, it gets very, very little value. It only helps you double soak. So when I look at that talent and realize it has a low win rate, the only logical conclusion I can come to is that people don't double soak as Leoric.
I always double soak on Towers of Doom. I go nuts to convince my team to just let me double soak.
And it's not by a small margin. It has a 4% lower win rate in Master and Diamond.
Well,
so it makes me sad. But yes, if you have an off lane that can double soak, your team can focus exclusively on pushing with the 4-man, it makes a big difference. Vikings, Towers of Doom is considered one of the best Viking maps in the entire game. This is one of the reasons, because Vikings are essentially double soakers, right? They can soak as many lanes as they want to. Abathur's considered very good on towers. He can't double clear, but he can double soak. And like all these things that you can do very, very effectively. Mathael, Blaze can double soak. ETC can double soak from 7 onwards with Echo Pedal, and then he also has a global. Dahaka can actually double soak on this map. With the right talent build, he can do it very efficiently. So there's lots of double soakers on the map. They are all very, very good on the map if your team actually takes that advantage and pushes bottom.
Yeah, okay, good. That's a very good point. For my record, I'm pretty good with Leoric on the Towers of Doom. Like, my win rate is pretty good. So I'm kind of sad that you told me that it's not successful for the most part. Kind of makes
Well,
me sad.
it only helps with double soaking. So unless
Yeah.
you're double soaking, it doesn't have a good win rate, which I think most people don't understand the concept of double soaking, or their team doesn't believe that they can double soak.
I
And
think
it's like
most.
I'm gonna help you clear this wave, and like I don't need help. Please don't help me.
Yeah, I think it just falls down. Most people don't understand the concept of double soaking. You just need to spoon feed them. Please stay as 4 bottom and hope they actually follow through. Okay, next map. Actually, I skipped it because I'm going through your list. The next one I want to talk about is Sky Temple, and we kind of mentioned it a little bit when we mentioned Probius. And Sky Temple is again another very unique map, not only because of the way the objective works, but because also we've seen some interesting drafts on the map. Not only Probius that I've mentioned, but also we've seen the solo support Abathur Valera there, which is kind of notorious. Cav, please, let's talk about a bit about the objective, the structures there, the boss that also exists there, the infamous throw pit.
All right, Sky Temple's a really interesting map. The only thing it's really comparable to is Blackheart's Bay because the objective damages structures directly, and except for Abathur with Mule, there is no way to heal structures. So here's how Sky Temple works. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter that much if you're ahead in mining experience, but like let's assume you're even in experience but ahead on structures, you're winning. Most of the temple phases are going to be double temple phases. So if you ever get ahead on structures and then you trade temples, you're still ahead on structures by the same amount. And you trade and you trade and you trade, and the enemy team is losing, core when they're just starting to damage your keeps. So that's a really, really big deal. Basically, the thing that matters most on Sky Temple, more than anything else, is structures. It's considered, believe it or not, it's considered one of the most snowbally maps in professional play. Because once you're ahead on structures, you can just be very conservative in your decision making. The enemy team has to find you and kill you, has to somehow punish you, and they have to come onto your side of the map to do it, or you just win. So late game heroes suck on Sky Temple. They're really bad because you just want to get ahead in structures and then sit on your lead for the remainder of the game and play very slowly and carefully. The number of like major comebacks we've seen on Sky Temple are pretty few and far between. There was an absolutely amazing one in the 2016 GCWC, which I got to cast it from the clean feed. I was very excited. It's still on my YouTube channel. And it was Ballistics with no keeps up. 0 keeps up versus Tempo Storm. And Ballistics manages to push out their lanes and keep the clear and keep the catapults off core and consistently kill Tempo Storm over and over again. It's like it was almost an unlosable game from Tempo Storm at that point. If you were looking at the game and be like, if this plays out like a typical Sky Temple game, they're never going to win. So it is possible to come back from a structure disadvantage, but it's very difficult, and you have to be literally one of the best teams in the world in order to pull it off. The major comeback mechanic, once you're behind on structures, is boss. And not just one boss. This is the thing that most people miss. You actually have to, on average, get 2 bosses to come back and win on Sky Temple. So if you're behind on structures, you should do boss immediately. And then 5 minutes later, you should do boss again, win it, and end with it. Because the first boss will get core and hopefully, or get the fort and hopefully get some damage on the keep wall. And the second boss will get keep and core if you get a kill while you're pushing with it. So it's almost a flowchart of get ahead in structures. The only thing the enemy team can do is boss, fight over boss. If you win boss, you win the game. Because there's no more comeback mechanics at that point in the game. And then you see some comps that abuse this. We've seen the Samuro comp with Falstad to Haka, Sun Soul Sport Abathur, where it's just like, we're just going to push buildings. And we win. Like, we just won because we were so far ahead in structures. We actually killed a keep, and then we cloned Samuro, and we actually killed core. Pick comps are really good because you don't necessarily have to have full-out team fights on the map. As people are rotating around to defend structures from minion waves and push, you can pick them off. And as you pick them off, they can't defend anymore. And the minions get more and more and more value because they get more and more and more structure damage. You actually just need enough wave clear to get your minions on the buildings if you can constantly kill the people who are coming to defend against the minion waves.
It also makes Mule quite valuable on the map.
Yeah, Abathur is first banned on Sky Temple very frequently for a really good reason.
Yeah. Fantastic. We do have by the way, a question. I guess it was from the Towers of Doom map. What's the right build for the Haka Bushmaster build plus minion clear? came from Soul Wildman.
So the meta build is tissue generation at 1, but because of the 2 bushes around boss between mid and top, if you take enhanced agility, you can actually walk from mid to top fast enough to not miss any soak. That's the really big thing. Is if you want to double soak, you actually need to go enhanced agility. If you have Primal Swarm or Ferocious Stalker at 13, you can actually do this on Cursed Hollow as well. You can actually double soak on Cursed Hollow as Dahaka by walking back and forth. Because there's so many bushes, and you get the move speed increase, so it's like having mount speed.
Cool.
And then you also have the increased wave clear. So there's certain really niche scenarios where Dahaka can double soak. I'm not necessarily recommend those builds, but they are potentially viable. And certainly if your team is going to let you double soak while they 4-mana lanes, worth considering.
All right, fantastic. So the next map we'll talk about is actually going to be... Let me just check this. So the next map we're going to talk about is going to be Volskaya Foundry. One of the maps that actually received some changes not too long ago. The objective, the way the objective actually works has changed a lot. The way it scales, and actually this caused a lot of changes to the dynamic and the way the map works and how you draft in it. It seems like the objective, you know, if before it was pretty much a wet noodle level of objective, now it became a really oppressive one. Not on the same levels as the Immortal and Battlefield of Eternity, but at least not at the beginning, but it became quite strong. Cav.
I actually released a video on Volskaya when it came out about how it was the best late game map in the entire game because the objective was awful and never needed to be fought over. And taking the support camp was better than taking the objective because of the amount of experience it gave you. And then they buffed, and that video, the objective was so poor that it was actually better to put one person in it and have them hop back and forth between seats using all the abilities on cooldown than it was to you put 2 people inside of it, because it did less damage than most heroes. Therefore, why would you put 2 people in it instead of 1? And there's a clip floating around of Psalm early on. His team won the objective, but the enemy team had a Chromie. He got on the objective, piloted it into his base, and left it there, so that Chromie couldn't stack on it. They did that for the entire game. They literally just didn't ever use it because they just didn't want to give Chromie free stacks. Because it wasn't worth the trade-off. Like, it did so little damage that it wasn't worth the trade-off of giving it. And then they buffed it. And now Volskaya is probably the premier team fight map in the entire game. We've seen teams give the first objective while staying relatively even in experience because of the pick up the support camp in exchange. And they consistently soak in a few other factors, but never the second, never the third. So you don't want a late game scaling comp on Volskaya. You want a comp that spikes no later than level 10. And basically, there's nothing to do on the map except mercs and teamfight. That's it. You want to make sure you get turret camps because they give an enormous amount of experience. You want to make sure you get the support camp because it gives an enormous amount of experience. It also gives items. You can get the other camps to push during the objective. It's not bad. It's not necessary, but it's not like a bad thing to do. It's never bad. It's just that they're not very strong as a camp. And yes, Anytime White makes a good point in chat. In the Korean GM ladder, this was a real thing that happened. People would get the objective, run it under towers, and then leave. And they would just leave it there, unpiloted, because it would tank building shots. They would have 5v5s under forts, and they would just be tanking tower shots, essentially, while no one was in it. That was the best use of it at the time. But now the objective, it does so much damage, it has so much pickoff potential, it does so much structure damage. It instantly clears waves with the root on the W for pilot mode. The Q on pilot does so much damage to buildings. Laser is a huge pickoff tool. If you have any CC, laser can pretty much one-shot a lot of squishy heroes, especially if they also have a machine gun. Most people don't do that very efficiently. I've even seen pro players mess up cooldowns a lot. I've even seen pros not use E on the driver. By the way, the driver E not only gives everyone on your team a shield that's in range, it also increases the mech's armor by 25, which means that if you're taking tower shots, you should hit your E to increase the life of the mech. Very surprised how many pro players don't do that. But it's really just you do mercs, you win the team fight, you get the objective, you push with the objective, you set up for the next objective, you get that objective, you push with that objective to set up for the next objective, you get the third objective, and you win the game. That's the entirety of the map. It's not very interactive, I'm not gonna lie. Volskaya is kind of fun to play if you like brawling, but in terms of strategy, there's not much there. It's draft a comp that will win a team fight, draft just enough wave clear to not fall behind in macro, and do camps.
So I guess there's should be a lot of priority on kill comps and potentially double support. Is that a thing?
Yeah, and double support is probably always going to be the best team fight composition in the game because you can make so many mistakes and still be totally fine. It's just a question of needing enough wave clear because supports don't give you that. And you not only need the wave clear to clear the waves, obviously, but you need the wave clear to give yourself time to do the camp safely.
Okay, so Volskaya, a lot of emphasis on team fighting there, and the tools, I guess you would call them, right? Collecting the turrets, collecting the healing totem, or whatever it's officially called, and winning the objective.
Biotic emitter.
Biotic emitter. Okay, so team fighting and collecting the various items and win the objective and win the game. Seemed pretty straightforward actually for a map. Out of all the maps, it seemed pretty straightforward.
It really is. It's not a super complicated map.
No, it doesn't look like it. All right, this was a pretty quick one, and I guess now basically we covered all the maps that we have in HGC as well as in Heroes Lounge. But there's one more map I'd like us to talk about, and this is for those among us who play Team League, who play Hero League, and that is the new addition to the game, Alterac Pass, and that is, I'll admit, it's still a very new map to me, and I'm not really quite sure what's going on there. So, Cav.
All right, so I actually I released a video on Alterac Pass, and I want to talk about old Alterac Pass first, and then talk about the changes that were made and how it impacted the map. So, old Alterac Pass, the best way to snowball the map was basically pub stomp people who didn't understand the map. And what you would do is you would draft an early game kill comp. You would just soak until 4. The enemy team would come to fight over the objective. Usually they would overextend into you, fighting on your side of the map, because they're like, oh, the objective's so important, we got to win it, and they would just run at you. And then you'd kill them and go cap the objective. And then you would 5-man push a lane once you win the objective, because generally one full 5-man wipe is enough to get the objective. And you would 5-man push a lane, and because this gave the cavalry in that lane armor, 25 armor, they lived forever. They had so much health. The average result of that strategy was to get a keep, and you would get level 10 off of that keep. And then you would back up and get the boss in that same lane, and you would get the boss and you'd push to end with it because you had 10 and they didn't. That was the way most people who could understand how strong an objective was would play the map, because people would just go fight for the objective because it was so important. Now, if you go on the enemy side of the map to start, and they have a defender's advantage, because whenever you're on the enemy side of the map, they have an inherent defender's advantage because you're overextended. If you start losing, you have a long way to go to run away. This is dumb. It is a bad idea. One of the reasons you don't see a lot of invades necessarily, unless you have a lot of vision control in pro play, is because being on the enemy side of the map is really, really dangerous. If you make any mistakes, you're dead and you're going to lose. That's the best way to snowball the map. And in my opinion, that was a good way to win the map, but you're essentially pub stomping people who were bad. Even if they're good mechanically, like this happened in GM level play fairly consistently. It happened in unranked draft when you're like all GMs on one side and a bunch of masters and players on the other. But GM mechanics don't necessarily mean having brain, as Heroes Lounge likes to put it. So
Okay.
I made a video and I established, and I did a lot of testing to prove this. It is possible, it should be impossible if the map is drafted correctly, to cap the objective pre-10. The enemy team has to actually kill the middle fort before it's safe to cap the objective if you draft from a very short list of heroes. And I made a video. I got Snipe City, which is a custom Discord that occasionally runs customs against each other because they are tired of waiting for queues or they want everyone on comms from EU. And we played a game, and the game basically they couldn't cap. They literally could not cap the objective until level 10 because they needed to kill middle forts. They got 10, they pushed in middle fort, killed it, and then it was possible for them to cap the objective. Now, that's when the objective was really, really strong, and therefore that level of consideration was warranted. Now, the level of the objective is a little bit lower. It's quite a bit lower. It doesn't get armor, so the 5-man pushing strategy isn't quite as valid anymore. And it's actually become sort of a late game centric map in a lot of cases. We've seen people who like playing Vikings have started to play quite a bit of Vikings in like GM Hero League on Alterac paths. We've seen a lot of Asmo, again, scaling and stacking heroes. The objective got significantly weaker. And I still think the best strategy is just delay the objectives for as long as possible, because the objective doesn't scale very well with time in terms of health. It's always easier to defend it if you're later in the game because heroes scale faster than the objective does. So it's always easier to defend it.
Okay.
And so snowballing the map is not as possible with the nerfs that happened. And so that strategy of just being an absolute pub stomp won't be as effective. But the strategy of delaying is also less effective unless you're drafting a late game team composition on purpose, because the enemy team is also, leveling up at the same time.
Okay. What about the Merc camp that you have there on the map? I remember it was quite powerful, and normally it would just push all the way to the keep. Is this still the case?
Um, it is, and actually, we'll talk about Mercamp. So the bosses, first of all, are exactly the same as the Cursed Hollow bosses, except they have the snowball that gives you an area slow instead of a root. That's not as good.
Yeah.
So if you've ever thought, man, this Cursed Hollow boss does not seem terribly impactful, the Alterac Pass ones are that, but worse. So something to think about. They're not very good. They're basically just HP sacks that will bait buildings into targeting them while you push. You're essentially using it as a shield against buildings. That's all you're using it for. But the Knoll camps are Hellbats. They have the armor reduction, but there's 3 of them instead of 2 of them. If you've ever had a really good Knoll push going on Braxis with the anti-armor on buildings and just watching the buildings melt, really good. Also, the core has armor. People forget that. The core has armor. The Knolls reduce armor. It's unlikely that a boss at most points in the game will end the game on core by itself, even if it's pushing with a minion wave. The Knoll camp actually will end the game by itself if it's pushing uncontested down mid. So in terms of map pressure, the Knoll camps are much better than boss. For like a camp that's split, for like a camp you want to split during the objective. So you really want to get, and it has a very short cooldown in terms of the camp coming back up. So you really want to get it on cooldown fairly consistently.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. It is important to note that the boss armor is in direct correlation to how many keeps are up. So for every keep that you take down, he gets less armor. So normally, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, normally you cannot end only by having 1 keep down, unless you have a significant level advantage. Is that true?
Yeah. It's interesting because on most maps you have to be worried about the catapults ending. There's no catapults on Alterac Pass. A single lane will actually not end until the very, very late game because the core stops scaling, but the minions continue to scale.
They don't have a catapult, but they have like this fat.
They have this fat, this like Knoll type fat thing, but it's in the front, so it gets focused down first, and it doesn't do as much damage to a core as a normal catapult does. Although there's something funny you can do, which is you can have Morales heal it, and then when the enemy team comes back to stop Morales from soloing core by healing the minion, Morales can medevac out, and then the enemy team's all in their base, and you got the objective for free.
All right, you heard it here first. Morales solo core, guys, go for it.
It's actually like the only map where that's actually possible. Yeah, I mean you can heal catapults, but it's not as funny. But you do feel like the pressure to start backing once you realize that your core is dropping and that minion's not dying.
Yeah, I mean they are quite beefy, so they are staying there for quite a while. I'm interested to see if someone from Heroes Line is gonna make it happen. I'm sure someone will at some point. It'll be a good meme to watch, for sure. With that being said, actually, Cam, I think we're done with all the maps.
Yeah, we are. Took about an hour and a half.
I mean, at least I expected it to be a bit longer, but I am glad that we kind of wrapped it around an hour and a half. Again, we didn't cover the other maps, like Guardian of Terror, Blackheart's Bay, and so on and so forth, because we tried to focus on the HEC/Heroes Lounge map pool, and as a small bonus, Alterac pass for those of you who do a lot of Hero League and Team League, etc.
I mean, I can cover those. I can cover those real quick. None of those maps is particularly difficult once you have this understanding of the XP economy. You guys ready for this? Blackheart's Bay. It's exactly like Sky Temple, except you carry the objective round with you, so fighting is even worse when you're ahead than it is in Sky Temple. Never fight. The boss is also a worse comeback mechanic because it's a longer lane, and therefore boss is easier to defend. So once you're ahead on black parts, if you play correctly, the enemy team should never win, and you should do nothing but PvE for the entire remainder of the game. Good? Good.
Very really, really interactive, easy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and see, when Blackhearts was in the pro meta, it had a really interesting meta in terms of PvE, but people thought it was boring to watch. But I actually thought all the PvE decisions on Blackhearts were kind of interesting. It's just like there was no comeback mechanic. If one team played perfectly, and they got ahead early from even a small mistake, and then they played perfectly, it was impossible to win. The enemy team actually had to make a mistake. But like old Asmo strats were good on Blackhearts Bay. There was cool things. Garden of Terror. There's a lot of camps on Garden of Terror. You want to be getting out camps constantly. You want to prioritize the small seed camps over the big seed camps. And you want to fight with the terror, not push with the terror, because if you fight with the terror, then you can push afterwards and get a lot of value, whereas if the terror dies for free, it did nothing, and all of that hard work collecting seeds was bad. Haunted Mines, you will always get more value out of the sappers than you get out of the skulls for the first two. Basically, until you're on the third one, or until you're late enough in the game that you can actually push with the golem to end, don't go in the mines. Just don't go in the mines at all. It's always better to get camps and push buildings directly than it is to go in the mines. If you're going in the mines, you are incorrect. Don't miss soak to go in the mines. Don't miss camps to go in the mines. Just go in the mines. Mm-hmm. And then Warhead Junction, the best way to play Warhead Junction is draft heroes that can secure a boss at the 5-minute mark. Secure a boss, push with it, grab nukes, push with the boss, and just keep snowballing boss back and forth, pushing with nukes until the game ends. It's just a map where the only thing that really matters is cheesing bosses. Soak lanes, cheese bosses. That's Warhead. There's a reason these maps got voted out of the map pool by pro players.
All right, we have some questions. I'll just cover whatever I see question mark with. Follow Kaina. What is pirate juice? Or juice pirate, rather?
Juice pirates is... And actually, I want to write an entire article on this because a lot of people don't understand Juice Pirates. It's cool, but it's frustrating when people don't do it incorrectly. Juice Pirates is a really simple concept of you get a fort in a lane before level 10. You have Morales. You medevac your entire team to a keep, and the keep dies. There's lots of things that enable this to happen very consistently. There's different heroes you can draft. Drafting Juice Pirates is actually more complicated than it might initially appear. And you kill the keep. And then if the enemy team defends correctly, everyone on your team is dead at that point. And then you res. And then you do the same thing to core, and you get it down to like 50%. And then you res. And then you go do it again, and the game ends. The counterplay for this actually starts very, very early on because the enemy team has to realize you're doing it, and they have to open up their own win condition so that they can end in between some of those death timers. Occasionally, teams that do this correctly and the enemy team doesn't respond to it will actually end on that first medevac. They'll kill keep and then just go core and end. There's a lot of heroes that are really good for Juice Pirates. There's a lot of heroes that are really good against Juice Pirates that are actually okay for Juice Pirates as well. So you want to get those heroes on your team. Drafting it is complicated. It was popular on Sky Temple because if you get a tower top on Sky Temple and you then get the entirety of the top temple, the fort dies automatically. So you don't have to go on the enemy side of the map. You don't have to push at all. You just have to be like, I just want top temple. I just want this tower. I want this top temple, and then we're going to get the fort, and then the fort's dead. Tyrael is usually considered an essential piece because of sanctification, but he's not essential. He's just nice. They basically just need lots and lots of heroes with structure damage and morales.
Where did the name come from?
That's the name that the team that invented it gave it. It was an EU amateur team, actually, way back when Morales first came out, that sort of discovered it, and it spread.
Okay, interesting.
I think it's supposed to be because of Inspire from Raynor. Mm-hmm. That's the juice, and then because it's a medevac, that's the ship. so it's Juice Pirates. It's not a great name, but if you invent something, you get to name it, and that's what they called it. So,
All right, fantastic. Let me see if are there Cascon56 asking, is there any map where Brightwing is a good solo support pick?
Cursed, maybe. Other than Cursed, I can't really think of any situation where I'd be like, yeah, I want Brightwing here.
All right. I mean, she does cover the several points.
She does. She covers having a global, and she has boss control with Emerald Wind. So that's like two out of the three things you need in one hero. That's great, but and she can even go bribe things.
And you have markability, great.
So, but it's still Brightwing. Like that's how bad it is for Brightwing right now. She has three of the things you need on Crystal Ocean, and I'm like, maybe.
I mean, that's good, but
again, she did win in Korea. Like she won in Korea. Supernova played her on Crystal Hollow, and it was very dominant, and like she played very, very well.
I mean, back at the time, Fnatic also played Brightwing quite a bit, and
yeah, they had the they played it with Stitches. They had a 60-second pick cooldown, so they did Hook into Gorge into Emerald Wind, and every 60 seconds they could kill someone.
Fantastic. Well, with that being said, I think we're done. There are no more questions. Viewers, guys, girls, if you'd like to ask us some more questions in the future, please check out our Discord channel. Let me just check it really quickly. If you'll check out our Discord channel, we have the Educational Lounge section there. There's the Educational Show questions. You can leave their questions and we'll answer it at the beginning of the next show. Sadly, there weren't any questions from the previous show, but there was a lot of discussion going on stuff people would like to see us covering in the future, Cav. So I have a lot of ideas of topics to talk about. If you enjoyed this handsome man's detailed map breakdown, guys, please type !CG in chat. It will give you information about his Twitter and Twitch channel, so make sure you follow him. Cav, is there anything you want to say to the viewers before we close this session? It's been a long night.
I just thank everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you guys learned something. If this is something that interests you, I do a lot of educational content on my stream. I do an HEC rundown every Wednesday where we talk about professional games and what's going on in the professional meta. Normally I do Going Alone on Tuesdays. I think I'm gonna start doing Going Alone on Tuesdays, which is it's a segment that's all about offlaning. We talk about matchups and who wins and what you need to think about, like what's the mindset of an offlaner, because it's not a super well understood role outside of pro play and sometimes even in pro play. So it's really it's fun. It's a lot of education. If that's something you're interested in, definitely check it out.
For sure. If you want anything to do with HotS and education, check this guy's stuff out, please. And kind of as a taste for next week, and I know I haven't spoken to you about this, Cav, but I guess I'm just gonna reveal it now. I'd like us to have the next episode talk about drafting in general. And I think this is something most of you, if not all of you, would find it really interesting, especially since I've seen a lot of activity in the mock draft. And as a preparation for future, I guess I will not spoil it, but there is some future event we'd like to do related to drafting. So next week's show is probably going to be about drafting in Heroes of the Storm. Maybe we'll even cover the specific draft or general draft per map. We'll have to see. If you enjoyed this, make sure you tune in next week. And, I mean, that being said, have a good night, and I'll see you guys next time. It has been a long night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.